Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Nice that you're here. And we have maybe about 45 minutes because we will have a few minutes at the end to break before we move on back to the plenary to discuss, this point that Makoto presented, which is the idea or the challenges, the opportunities behind building capacities to assess co-benefits and impacts of climate action and policy. So when we're moving towards, or when, from our different perspectives, we're making efforts to advance sustainable development goals, I say SDGs, capital letters, but also lower cap letters, all of this adaptation, mitigation, climate development progress that we, from our different perspectives, are trying to pursue. How can capacity building contribute to attaining, to making these efforts more efficient, more effective, to making both projects but also policies more meaningful, right? That's the discussion we're going to have here. And what we have done is to split it into 4 questions. So what I'd love to do is to spend about 10 minutes in each so that we time ourselves properly. We don't spend too much in one, we forget addressing the last one and so on. So I will ask our rapporteur for this session, which is Max, to first, just say hi, introduce themselves. I won't go for a round of introductions because I think we are too many and that will take up too much time. But just Max, if you could then say hi. And what I will ask you also, because you'll be taking notes, is also to give us a heads up 10 minutes after we start each question discussion so that we move on to the next. And so Max, if you can just...
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel. My name is Max. I'm from the Secretariat, so I will be supporting this session by taking notes and keeping track of the time, as you mentioned. Also, just to point out that we have a Padlet set up, so if you want to pose any questions related to the discussion, also feel free to use the link I just shared in the chat. And with that, I will give it back to Danielle to start this discussion.
Thanks, Max. And I would like to ask everyone to log into or click. You don't have to log into, just click onto the Padlet. It has a very nice picture there. You might see it. So if you click into that, you will access the Padlet. And for each of the 4 points, so I want to now for us to focus on the first one. And before we start the conversation, like voice conversation, I'd love to ask each of everyone to just spend about a couple of minutes just in the first column, right? The column that asks the question, what gaps in knowledge and learning are blocking progress on the SDGs? And just start putting down there your comments. You just click on the plus sign under that label, and then you can type your answer, your comment, your even question. So let's spend the next couple of minutes by starting to populate that space. Think about what gaps in knowledge and learning are blocking progress on the SDGs. And here we're trying to be very concrete, right? Let's try to make this conversation really concrete. I think at the panel level, we heard a lot of concrete, but also kind of bigger questions and bigger framings. So let's try to be quite concrete. What are the gaps? What is blocking progress on the SDGs, and how, particularly when we're talking about knowledge and learning. So we're not talking here about technical fixes. We're talking about when it comes to knowledge and learning, what is blocking progress. I will be silent right now for a couple of minutes and let you start populating that. Feel free, just, it doesn't have to be completely well thought. Just like put down in words what you are thinking about, what you are questioning yourself about. I'll be quiet for a couple of minutes. Over to you to start populating this. Only the first column. Thanks. So I'll just mention, thank you, Vishal, for putting the information there. I've just copy-pasted it into the Padlet. So and that's totally fine. For others, if you go into the Padlet directly, Victor's link just a little bit above, you can directly into the Padlet copy or paste your comments. I haven't seen many, but I think we are a good group here of, 20 somethings. So please do feel free to start putting there just your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, your concerns. Okay, while you still have your thoughts going, and please do continue to populate that. I'd like to start a discussion, and from my point of view, I think there's often big differences in terms of understandings, but also approaches to what a solution may be, and what kind of knowledge should be part of that solution. Sometimes we're working, for example, right now in the Pacific Islands, developing a national adaptation plan or supporting the development of an app. And we're finding that for some areas there is a strong capacity, but for others that are quite important around gender, for example, there are big gaps. So how do you make sure that gender, in this case, is an important integral element of an app, and that knowledge doesn't just come from outside, inform and then leaves, that knowledge is part of the whole adaptation process in this particular case. So over to you, over to anyone, maybe raise your hand if you can find that. It's on the top when you see that little person there with a hand. If you click on that, there's a hand, and then I will see that your hand is up, and I can give you the floor. But if that doesn't work for you, just jump in, unmute yourself, and come in with your thoughts. What gaps in knowledge and learning are blocking progress on sustainable development? Marcena, I think you are...
Yes, I only came now. Sorry. Hello, Daniel. I thought it was going to be a longer break than actually it was. So sorry for being late.
No problem at all. Right. Maybe could I, Vishal, if you would like, because you're the one who's been putting some ideas here, would you like to share some of the points you're talking about? Lack of exact mechanism of what constitutes climate change, conflict of immediate human survival needs, and long-term goals. Would you like to expand a little bit on your points, Vishal?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to say there is so much of information floating around. And what is our source of information? It is either Wikipedia or YouTube or Facebook and maybe UNFCCC or United Nations portals. These are our sources of information. And when you go on these portals, especially YouTube, you see some people are saying that climate change is not an emergency as we feel, and some say it is an emergency. A lot of people talk about historical global warming having taken place. So is this global warming an immediate crisis or not? How much of a crisis it actually is, how much it is not. But people who are experiencing actual floods, actual hurricanes, cyclones, they are the ones who are actually at the edge of climate change problems. And they are the ones who feel that climate change is actually a real thing. In fact, you would be aware that in the United States, especially in southern part, the corn crop has moved further north because of increase in temperature. So the farmers there are directly feeling the change of climate change there. If there is knowledge, it is too technical in nature, and it is not very understandable by a common person. And also, a lot of this knowledge is not available at the grassroots level. The people who will actually make a difference. Sometimes we feel that policy is what will bring about a change. But actually, my opinion is that climate change is an ethical value. And ethical values cannot be driven top down. Ethical values have to be driven bottom up. That means there has to be a grassroots movement. And what is a grassroots movement? Does it mean a revolution? Does it mean everybody has to join together and get into the streets and say that we want change. No. Everybody has to change at their own level to the best that they can do. Of course, policy will support us, and policy will help us implement what we truly feel is helping in reducing greenhouse gases, or whatever is our understanding of knowledge. Also, I feel that what is knowledge today becomes obsolete tomorrow. I'm sure we'll get many more insights with the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning subsequently, that we will course correct ourselves as to what exactly we need in order to achieve climate change. Just one final point I'll make, and it's a point of ethics and business and climate finance. When we say that, we should move over to solar, or we should move over to wind energy, tidal energy, or agroecology, or agroforestry, or any kind of technology that we want to implement, or even crop residue burning, the issue is, are we seeing the complete cycle cost, the cost of manufacturing the solar panel versus the carbon return it is giving? Generally, when we adopt technologies, we are seeing financial returns. We are seeing return on finance. Oh, I'm getting my finance returns in 10 years. But that's not how we have to see it. We have to see it. Am I getting carbon returns in next 30 years, in next 40 years? If I have used 100 tons of carbon to produce this windmill, in next 30 years, will I save 100 tons of carbon? Yeah, that's all I had in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vishal. Appreciate your insight. And by the way, for you and for everyone, could you also mention just the organization you are associated with?
Yeah, I'm associated with Citizens Climate Education, Citizens Climate International.
Great. Thanks, Vishal. Great. So, that's really a lot of information that you've shared, a lot of insights, a lot of, really important positions. It would be great if someone would like to respond, either respond to Vishal or just add new points. And I believe there's a hand up. Let me find it here. Marcia. Marcia, over to you. And please start by introducing yourself and your organization. Thanks.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I represent the Environmental Management Authority, and I'm part of the Trinidad and Tobago delegation. Well, first of all, living in SIDS, we are definitely exposed to many of the impacts of climate change. One of the things we have done, and of course we're getting into policy now, because as you know, most countries have policies for everything. But we need to have these policies living documents, not documents that are on a shelf or that you can access electronically on a website. And what we have done, we have developed our national environmental policy, and we have been trying to get each thing that we do, even in our strategic development work, to align everything that we do with the SDGs. So that is, for one thing, that's answering the first question more or less, so giving some comment or contribution to it, so that there'll be no gaps. Now, of course, it's the process, and it continues. It doesn't happen overnight. So we constantly have to let people understand, even our own colleagues, that there is some impact on everything they do, and there is a connection to the SDGs. Another thing I'd like to raise, and following on Vishal's comment, is the NGO or civil society, grassroots. Well, we don't like to call them grassroots, but it's civil society or community-based and NGO, environmental NGOs. We try to incorporate them into all the decision makings, all the discussions that we have. So once we develop something, there is input from them. And even if we develop, we also send to them, because we have an umbrella body called the Council of Presidents for the Environment. So they are very involved in all the decision making. But it's really to get the SDGs to let people see that everything that you do, all of us, whether it be in our work life or otherwise, that there's an SDG component or components involved in everything. So I think it's closing in that gap. It's not an academic thing or a policy or a document. It's about lifestyle. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much, Marcia. That's really, really helpful and insightful. And before going to Marcena, I did want to ask you something more, Marcia. From your particular case, representing a country, in this case Trinidad and Tobago, is there a particular gap in knowledge, that you feel, or in the learning process that you feel there's room for improvement? I gave the example in SIDS in the Pacific, where, for example, there's a big gap in gender-related capacities. And is there in Trinidad and Tobago some particular area where you feel, okay, this is where capacity building is important, whether it is a theme or whether it is in the process of doing, more integrated learning, whatever it may be?
I think it's all of them. Capacity building, I think, is a term that's bandied around, but it's not really put into practice as effectively as it should be. As we speak, tomorrow we're supposed to be doing a CAP on capacity building with respect to climate change. And this is a CARI Forum, which is the Caribbean regions that consultants are, organizing it. Because we really need to know, this was done in 2004, but that's a long time ago. We really need to know how people feel, what they know about climate change, first of all. How does it impact them? And the gender-related aspects, how does it impact women? How does it impact children, men? People from the private sector, which is also very important, manufacturers and so on. So I think to answer your question, it's capacity building is needed or is lacking in many components of society.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you very much. So,
what you asked.
Yeah.
I don't have clarified. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks very much for that, Marcia. And I think there was one thing you mentioned also. You said, we need to know what people know about climate change, what they feel. And I think also that's super important, how people respond to that. Marcena, over to you to hear your perspective.
Yes. Thank you, Daniel. I'm here mostly to listen and learn because we need to take into account the outcomes of the Durban Forum in further PCCB work. And we will definitely dissect the outcomes in order to, follow up in a useful way. However, what I wanted to refer to were comments made by Mr. Gupta about reliability of information that's available in the public domain. And I think that the best way is to look at the executive summaries for the work of the IPCC, because of course the full report is too massive to expect just ordinary people that are not working on climate issues to delve into, but executive summaries have 38 pages, if you go through the working group outcomes, and there's always relevant and more or less balanced knowledge, which is presenting, the compendium of wisdom on what's going on, and it's constantly updated. At the moment, IPCC is preparing the 6th report, and I'm sure that we will be able to find a lot of relevant information, which is really in the form of executive summary, digestible for ordinary citizen. Another thing that I wanted quickly to cover is as well this notion who to trust, and we know that now it became very fashionable in the corporate world, to claim green credentials, and as usual we have to be really, I would say, it's great to collaborate with business, but when they are asking NGOs or other people's movements for collaboration, you really need to look into the background to see whether really these green policies are as green as they claim, because as usual we know that it can be I wouldn't mention which companies, but we know that there are some companies which live off fossil fuels that are claiming to becoming green. And it is very much like tobacco companies in the past that were also trying to do a lot of research and trying to ensure that people thought that smoking wasn't really relevant for various things. So I think that it's always important. So where to look for finance? I think that international organizations are the best sources of finance, and there are a lot of various grants that grassroots movements can apply for, because obviously people need some support to pay for communication and so on, and without money you can't do much. So this would be my, as I say, comment on this intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcena. And by the way, I think maybe a lot of people here know you, but just to confirm that you are with the PCCB, I believe you're one of the leads of the PCCB, but I don't know if you want to say
well,
that.
I'm the outgoing co-chair, because as you know, every year we select 2 co-chairs among ourselves, and I've been co-chair for 3 consecutive years. And it's time for me to move on and let another colleague to take over. But I'm happy to tell you that I'm going to be a gender focal point for the PCCB from this meeting, and I'm also a lead on working group 3, which is communication and stakeholder engagement. So I hope I will still be meeting a lot of you in the context of the PCCB network and also in the capacity building hubs. And my term will end a year after that, because all our terms were extended because of the 2020 break in negotiations. So you will see it's unusual situation for the PCCB to have 5-year and 6-year terms for members.
All right, well, thanks for that info, and good luck with your new positions. That sounds great, Marcena. I think really important points, and I just want to make one comment, and it is that also Marcena pointed out the importance of IPCC information summaries that are there, and I think also Marcia and Vishal, and by the way, I'm using your first name. I hope that's okay, just to keep it a little bit rolling. But I think also the point that you raised about stakeholder being part of that knowledge production is important. And I think maybe there's something to say there between openness to this other type of understanding of visions of climate change, the ethical point that Vishal brought up. Okay, I would like us to now move, and I'm not going to say to the second, but to the third question. Okay, so let's go now to the third, because I think we've heard about the second a bit. Let's think for a couple of minutes in silence about what we can learn from actions and policies that exist there, whether it is a project, whether it is a grassroots movement, whether it is a policy, that have delivered co-benefits for both development and climate objectives. So we're talking here co-benefits, right? We're looking at SDGs, we're talking about climate at the same time. So what are some examples of work, again, could be policy or could be a project, could be an initiative, that is actually working maybe in the countries that you are working in or you're representing, that are producing co-benefits, that are working for climate action, but also are delivering other development-related objectives around water, around reduction of poverty, around gender equality. We are looking for those examples. So a couple of minutes to you. And please do feel free to use the Padlet again. I'll ask Max again to just share the link there. Click into that, and then you just, on the third column, click on that little plus sign, and then you can just quickly or briefly type your input. I'll give you 2 minutes by the clock, and then we'll come back and have another discussion. While you're still, collecting your ideas, I also would like to ask you to kind of frame it in the context of what we are discussing now, which is capacity building, right? Capacity strengthening, learning. So when you think about these projects, these ideas, also, we're seeing examples here: technologies, agriculture, policies, energy sector. It's not just the let's say the content of the project, the technology within the project, but also how is this reflected in capacity strengthening, so that helps us move forward, right? So there's a hand up. Let me see who it is. Thanks for that, Alejandra. Alejandra, over to you to share your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Daniel. I wanted to speak about something that I have been working on. I work as capacity building and finance advisor for ILAC. But also in recent months, I worked in a study on how to implement, or basically to see how Article 2.1c is being implemented or not in Colombia. And Article 2.1c refers to the consistency of financial flows with decarbonization and resilience. And it's, I would say, kind of the forgotten goal of the Paris Agreement. If you look about the three long-term goals, Article 2.1a, b, and c, 1a being the one on 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. So everyone talks about that one. People talk about adaptation, and very little people are talking about this consistency of financial flows. So what we did by looking at this is try to understand how the public flows and the private flows are in line to be consistent with Paris or not. And what we found is that there is really little understanding of climate change and the benefits of climate action, both in the public and private sector. So in the private sector and the financial sector in particular, they do have some understanding of SDGs. But even if the Paris Agreement is a legally binding agreement, they have even less knowledge of how to align their flows to Paris. And this was really worrisome, because in the end, the financial sector being the major driver of the economy, they are not mainstreaming climate change as part of their investment decisions. So that was one thing. The other thing that we saw is that there are two things of how we can manage climate change as part of investments, right? So one is as a risk, and as it happens in Colombia, it happens in many other countries, there is a really big economic dependence to fossil fuels, to the fossil fuel industry. So in Colombia, for example, there is a huge part of the exports of the country, 60%, comes from fossil fuels. So even if their energy matrix, let's say their energy mix is clean, there is an economic dependence of these incomes to the country and to public investments. So you have to see climate change both as a risk, because you can create stranded assets in the long run if you don't start to have these investments and these sources for public budgeting from other sources, from with economic diversification, and not only from coal, but also as an opportunity, so that we can create different jobs and eradicate poverty at the same time. So I think I want to close with this. I see that the planning departments and the finance ministries have not yet enter into this dynamic of mainstreaming climate change as part of their planning processes. And sometimes they see it more like a risk of not doing what they have to do in the short term, rather than a risk that can have an impact in the long run in the economy. Yeah, so that was my input over.
Well, thanks very much, Alejandra. Really interesting stuff what you mentioned. And before moving to the next, can I ask you, like, in a sentence, just for everyone, so that we're all on the same page here, when you talk about the consistency of financial flows, what do you mean by consistency? What do you think, or what is meant by consistency? So that we're just clear, we're talking about different scales and the consistency. Is it about, I'll leave it to you to explain it.
Yeah, actually, there is no definition of consistency, but it basically would mean that investments, public and private investments, are meant to either reduce emissions, avoid emissions, or strengthen resilience in each country.
Okay, thanks very much, Alejandra. Again, thanks very much. So I've seen, meanwhile, a few comments. There's a comment from Marcia again. There's another point, I think, here that is going towards the idea of finding, I think it's relevant because we're talking about knowledge, learning, a bit of a mixture. You're mentioning here in the last comment, agroecology, rediscovering traditional ways of housing, agriculture. So that kind of marriage of the knowledges, right? From, technical, local, indigenous, what we don't normally associate with the predominant disciplines that contribute to forming and shaping, let's say, an IPCC report. So I wonder if there's something to be said around co-benefits, making sure that a project is comprehensive, and at the same time, does it mean that it's more inclusive of the whole set of knowledges that I just talked about? So if anyone would like to chip in on this, agree, disagree, very welcome.
Hi, Daniel. Can I make a point, Vishal?
Yes, Vishal, please, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I agree with Marzena, when she says that finance is an integral part of any venture which humans take, and of course, climate change cannot be any different. But somehow, maybe I'm wrong. I do get a feeling that climate change cannot be an investment opportunity. It cannot be a financial opportunity, right? I see climate finance more as a philanthropic venture. So why do I say this? When I hear people talking about climate finance, I see a lot of people talking about emissions trading and talking amongst each other that, it's a good thing to invest because you'll get 300% returns. Now my question is that anything which gives you returns will have it's more existential question. It's a philosophical question, not a technical one. Anything that gives you profit will have greed, right? So how do we balance this out, And do we have in our teams philosophers who are core ethics trained people, masters in ethics or masters in philosophy, who may help, finally the person who has the money has the power. But at least, we tell everybody, we show everybody some kind of direction, and we hope that everybody comes on the same path and starts walking together. So this is the question, it's kind of opinion and a question, actually.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Vishal. I think it's a really pertinent, really important point. I think, it's true. It has a philosophical element, but it's important to address this philosophical element within our discussions of climate change. We cannot just go to operational to the bottom line, we have to address those points. So thanks so much for bringing that up. And I think that really is a nice segue into the fourth and our final question, which is a little bit, what you were talking about, Visha, what you've all been talking about. What skills are needed and who needs them? Because the other assumption that tends to be is like capacity strengthening, capacity building is always for a certain group of people, limited group of people, either, local governments or community members. It tends to be an idea behind it that, certain ways of understanding the problem and the issue have to be taught to the operational level. But maybe there's more than that, right? What we're talking about here. So who needs to have these skills, and what are the skills that are needed in order, again, to really move into initiatives, policies that work for a multiple or a diversity of developmental goals, not just climate. That's what we are trying to come up with now. So I leave that question up to you. Again, in the Padlet, feel free to start populating it. But also, because we don't have much time left, just feel free, and you're very welcome to come in. Feel free to come in and just say, what are those skills, without having to, you don't necessarily have to give a full explanation, but what are those skills? I'm really interested. For example, are we talking about, we need more climate modelers or we need more partnerships between the meteorological agencies and local governments so that early warning systems work better. Or, picking up on Vishal's comments, we need to have a lot more, maybe humanities type of knowledge integrated into the thinking about what are the priorities to guide our policies and our strategies on climate change. So with that, really over to you to chip in on your thoughts. And meanwhile, someone has just posted a comment: how do we ensure technical knowledge parity among nations? It's true. I find that often there's countries getting a lot of support for capacity building objectives, or even just climate adaptation more in general, resilience, and others are really struggling to access them. It has to do with something that someone mentioned around the difficulty in accessing those funds, writing the proposals. I think in the panel, maybe the person from GIZ, Lena, brought this up, if I remember correctly. So that's also part of the discussion, right? What do you think about this? Okay, so I think time is kind of the essence now, in the sense of we're having to wrap it up. I feel I've talked more than I should have, but if you'd like to make a final say something in relation to the fourth question, or just a final thought on this discussion, please do come in. Oh yeah, Marcia Tinto, over back to you.
Yes, sorry about talking so much, but
not at all.
I'm looking at this last question, and I'm saying that many of these skills or these deliverables are implemented in our country, but I think the main problem is communication, lack of communication. So you may have the co-benefits going on through government and private sector and NGOs, because I think it was discussed before about the private sector or companies, for example, through their social responsibility, what we call greenwashing. So they do, a project and say, okay, we're dealing or treating with climate change. But I think the communication is very, very important, because very often there's something really significant going on, and people who ought to be involved or should know are not involved. So I think that's one of the biggest problems. And secondly, and this is what I think most people are saying all over, including in our country, there's a lot of focus on mitigation, but not enough on adaptation. Mm-hmm. And that really has to be addressed.
Definitely. Agree. Thanks very much, Marcia, for that. Vishal, the last word for you, and then we'll wrap it up to take the 5-minute break before we go back into the plenary.
Right, thanks. I just have a request that maybe in future some kind of a discussion could be taken up for inclusion of people from ethics background into SBIs and Sebesta committees also. I feel because when I've attended these, I haven't seen people, though they are technical experts, full marks and credits to them and their knowledge. But sometimes I feel we need in artificial intelligence, we don't only need programmers, we also need humanities. Similarly, in any venture, we need humanities. I think this should be thought about.
And Vishal, you mentioned which group of people to bring into the discussion?
The subsidiary body implementation and subsidiary body technical and scientific.
Sure, but which people were you hoping to bring into those fora?
The people who have formal education in ethics and philosophy.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Max. Also, Max has just informed us we will be reconvening in the main room at 4 p.m., meaning in 7 minutes. And before this, there will be a 5-minute break. So I think, Max, do we have to wrap it now, or do we have a couple of minutes for?
No, so I think we need to wrap up now so that we can have a moment to consolidate all the notes to report back, and then the participants can take a short break and stay in the same room where we will reconvene at 4.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for your participation. Thanks, Max, for guiding us here, and see you in 5 minutes. See you in 5 minutes in the plenary. Thanks again.